Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat, mga kabungangan Nicksters. Nandito na naman tayo sa isang episode ng Nickstradamus channel. Okay? Ngayong araw na ito ay sisimulan natin ating serye ng tungkol sa Kapaskuhan. Yung mga myths on Christmas. Para malaman ninyo kung totoo ba o hindi ang tungkol sa Kapaskuhan. Okay? At ito ay serye, kaya syempre, kung kayo ay bago pa lamang sa channel na ito, mag-subscribe na, watch, like, and share ang vlog na ito at iba pang vlogs ng channel. At saka, i-click nyo yung bell for notifications and updates. Okay? So, simulan na natin itong ating serye tungkol sa Kapaskuhan.
No one knows with certainty when Jesus was born. The Bible, in its many forms and editions, did not mention a month, much less a date of his birth. Christians had always claimed that the celebrations were originally theirs, by justifying this claim with simply the word Christ in the holidays. But they did not and could not dispute the earlier traditions that were really the basis for Christmas. In other words, there were facts they just ignored for whatever reason. Join me now as we explore the origin of Christmas. It is ridiculous that shepherds in Israel then and now are in the fields during Christmas, which is known to be cold in Bethlehem. Nothing much grows there at this time of the year. In all likelihood, those shepherds take their sheep to shelter and stayed inside. The Bible mentions that both Mary and Joseph were traveling then to take a part in a census. Historians say that censuses are not taken in December during those times, but rather in either September or October. After harvest, during autumn but before winter, is a much easier time for traveling. To the Christians, Christmas is not as important as Easter, because the resurrection in the latter event represents triumph over death, which for them is more important than mere birth. Moreover, commemorating death was more important to the Romans than birth, which is why the early Christians celebrated Easter, but not the birth of Jesus. While Easter is celebrated for almost 2 months in a year, that is, from February to April, Christmas in the Philippines today is said to start when the Burr months arrive, beginning with September, and all together spans for a little more than 4 months, ending after the Feast of the Three Kings in January of the following year. One can hear Christmas music being played everywhere, even when the typhoons start coming in. Let's begin now with Saturnalia. There was an ancient Roman festival called Saturnalia. It was held in honor of their god Saturn on December 17 of both the Roman and Julian calendars then, the latter of which was later expanded through to the winter solstice or at about December 23. There was also another winter solstice festival, though minor at that, known as Brumalia, which was celebrated until the 11th century AD, where the Roman farmers would sacrifice pigs to both their gods Saturn and Ceres. This Roman Dies Festus, or legal holiday, had a sacrifice at the temple of Saturn in the Roman Forum and a public banquet called Convivium Publicum, followed by private gift-giving, continual partying, and a carnival atmosphere that overturned the social norms of ancient Rome. The feet of the statue of Saturn at his main temple were bound in wool, but this was removed for the Dies Festus as an act of liberation. The official rituals were carried out according to the Ritus Graecus, or Greek rite. A priest officiates the sacrifice capite velato, or with their heads covered by a special fold of the toga, or garment they were wearing, not capite aperto, or with their heads bare. This procedure was explained by the assimilation of the Romans' belief in Saturn with his Greek counterpart, Cronus. Historians said that the Romans often adopted and reinterpreted Greek myths, iconography, and even religious practices for their own deities. In Roman art, the covered head is a symbol of pietas or piety, and the individual status as a pontifex or pontiff, augur, or priest. This art expression influenced the Apostle Paul's prohibition against Christians praying with their heads covered. For any man who prayed or prophesied with his head covered dishonored his head. For that reason, female Christians wore veils in churches. Gambling was permitted. Coins and nuts were used as stakes. Masters provided table service for their slaves, during which the latter would experience liberty like free men. The gifts given were usually gag gifts intended as practical jokes, or small figurines made of wax or pottery known as sigillaria. In fact, there was a street in Rome called Via Sigillaria, which was dedicated to manufacturing and selling sigillaria. Rampant overeating and drunkenness were the rule. All forms of work and exercise regimens were suspended. Roman schools were closed. Courts were not in session, so no justice could be administered. No declaration of war could also be made. After the public rituals were done, observances were continued at home. On December 18 and 19, domestic rituals included bathing early, and those with means sacrificed a suckling pig, which was a traditional offering to an earth deity. The festival of Saturnalia was the equivalent of the earlier Greek holiday of Chronia, which was celebrated on the 12th day of the Attic or Athenian lunisolar calendar month of Hekatombion in late midsummer, that is, from mid-July to mid-August. The Romans gave that earlier holiday theological importance, which they saw as a restoration of the ancient Golden Age, where the world was still ruled by the god Saturn. In Roman mythology, Saturn was a deity of agriculture, believed to have reigned over the world in a golden age when humans were still innocent and enjoyed spontaneous bounty without labor. In fact, the ancient Roman historian Justinus writes that a historical king named Saturnus headed the pre-Roman aborigines of Italy and ruled with extraordinary justice. No one was a slave in his reign. Everybody was equal. No one had any private property. Instead, all things were commonly owned and undivided. In astrology, this was most probably the age of Capricorn, a zodiac sign ruled by the planet Saturn. It was marked by hard work and repressed emotions. There was always the urge to take on responsibility and strive for success. It was an age of transformation from a lower animalistic state of selfishness and materiality to a higher form of spirituality and enlightenment. Truly, This belief system represented the change from winter to spring, darkness to light. Another Latin writer from antiquity named Macrobius said the same events happened, and in Lucian's Saturnalia, it was stated that during this festive season, Kronos himself, not Kronos, but another deity said to personify time, in pre-Socratic philosophy and literature, proclaimed that it was lawful during that time to be drunken and for slaves to revile their lords. Macrobius also added that Saturnalia was a festival of light leading to the winter solstice. There was an abundant presence of candles that symbolized the quest for knowledge and truth. This renewal of light and the coming of the new year was then celebrated in the later Roman Empire during the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, or the birth of the unconquerable sun, which fell on December 25. Now, aside from Saturn, there were other gods. The crushing defeats suffered by the Romans from the Carthaginians during the Second Punic War resulted in a number of religious innovations and reforms. It was not unusual for the Romans to offer cultus, or cult worship, to the deities of other nations in the hope of evocatio, or redirecting their favor, such as appeasing Baal Hamon, the Carthaginian counterpart of the Roman Saturn and the Greek Kronos. And so, there was Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus, or the unconquerable sun, also known as Helios, was long considered the official sun god of the later Roman Empire. In the traditional view, Sol Invictus was the second of two entirely different sun gods in Rome. The first, Sol Invictus, was an early Roman deity of minor importance whose cult petered out by the 1st century AD. The second, Sol Invictus, was a Syrian sun god whose cult was first promoted in Rome under its emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, also known as Elagabalus, who reigned from 218 to 222 AD, but which cult failed. It was only 50 years later, or on December 25, 274 AD, that the Roman Emperor Aurelian, after several other emperors before him and who reigned from 270 to 275 AD, succeeded in establishing the cult of Sol Invictus as an official religion, alongside other traditional Roman cults. There is still no consensus among the traditionalists today as to which Syrian sun god the Sol Invictus was referring. Either the sky god Elagabla of Emesa, also called Elagabalus, after whom the emperor adopted his name, or Malakbel of Palmyra. It was during the reign of Emperor Constantine I that Sol Invictus was abandoned in favor of Christianity, the last inscription to Sol Invictus dating 387 AD. In the 5th century AD, the Christian theologian Augustine found it necessary to preach against the large number of devotees to Sol Invictus in order to promote Christianity. What the revisionist view espouses, however, does not matter, being purely based on conjecture. It may be added that there was a cult of Mithras too. This was popular among the military in the Roman Empire from the 1st to the 4th centuries AD. It was believed that they celebrated his birthday also on December 25. There were depictions of Mithra as a young man being born from a rock, and in others as a child holding a globe in one hand. Some statues of him certainly look like the infant Jesus of Prague today. Mer, or Mithra, was a Proto-Indo-Iranian sun god from Persia around the 6th century BCE, later adapted into ancient Greece as Mithras. He was a deity of covenant, light, and justice. He was also the god praised in the Rig Veda, which in Sanskrit was the name of the sun god. Historians say that the Roman soldiers encountered this belief system in their military excursions to Zoroastrian Persia. Mithra has been mentioned in inscriptions at Susa and Hamadan as early as 404 BCE during the time of Artaxerxes II. Although the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti was not specific to the mysteries of Mithras, and was but a general festival of the sun, still it was an important day for the Romans even before the Christians appropriated the festive day to be theirs. Verily, those early Christians branded everything else as pagan, yet using the festivities as though the rituals originated from them. To this day, the sun salutation yoga is preceded by chanting Om Mitraya Namaha, where Mitraya is one of the 108 names for Lord Surya, or the sun god. Going much earlier now to the 25th and 24th centuries BCE, there was the ancient Egyptian deity of the sun named Ra. He ruled in all parts of the created world, sky, earth, and the underworld. Characteristic of Egyptian deities was that their identities were often combined with other gods, thereby forming an interconnection between them. Such was Ra Horakti, or Ra, who is Horus of the horizons. There was more of a title or manifestation than a composite deity. Their combination represented the sun's journey from horizon to horizon as Ra, meaning Ra as a symbolic deity of hope and rebirth. Curiously, Horus was the great-great-grandson of Ra. Horus was after all the sky god and contains both the sun and the moon. In the myths of Sokar, who was a Memphite god of the dead, rebirth and rejuvenation, it was stated that Horus of Egypt was born of a virgin during the winter solstice. The Greek priest Plutarch wrote in the late 1st and early 2nd centuries BCE about the Isis and Osiris myth, mentioning several winter solstice traditions in Egypt, including the birth of Hor-Pakhered, or Horus the child. Saturn may have been viewed by us today as all good and nice, but he has a malevolent aspect too. One of his consorts was Lua Saturni, or Saturn's Lua. She was identified with Lua Mater, or Mother Destruction, for she was a goddess in whose honor the weapons of enemies killed in war were burned in expiation. Saturn's chthonic nature, meaning directly from, in, under, or beneath the soil, connected him to the underworld and its ruler, Dis Pater, who was the equivalent of the Greek god of hidden wealth named Pluton, or Pluto in Latin. Sources from the 3rd century AD and later disclosed that Saturn was believed to have received dead gladiators as munera, or offerings, during or near the Saturnalia. These gladiatorial events lasted for 10 days throughout December and were presented mainly by the quaestors out of funds sponsored by the treasury of Saturn. The Temple of Saturn, in fact, housed the Aerarium Saturni, or state treasury, and was the administrative headquarters of the quaestors, or the public officials whose duties included oversight of the mint. This practice of munera was labeled by Christian apologists, or those who defended their religion, right or wrong, as a form of human sacrifice. There was, however, no evidence of this practice during the Roman Republic. The later theorists even claimed that the primeval Saturn demanded human victims. It was Macrobius who said that the Dis Pater was placated with human heads, and Saturn with sacrificial victims consisting of virorum victimis, or male victims killed by the victors. During the visit of Hercules to Italy, this demigod insisted that the munera be halted and the ritual reinterpreted. Instead of heads, the Romans were to offer effigies or masks called oscilia. These are small figures, most commonly faces, that were hung up as offerings to various deities for propitiation or expiation, and in connection with festivals and other ceremonies. This hanging of oscilia could have been the origin of the ornaments during Christmas in our Christmas trees. In fact, in the calendar of Philocalus, or the Philocalian calendar, which was a compilation of chronological and calendrical texts in 354 AD for a wealthy Roman Christian named Valentinus, by the calligrapher and illustrator Furius Dionysius Philocalus, there was a mask that represented Saturnalia. What about the Jewish tradition? Even in the Agadic tradition, which is part of Judaism's oral Torah, and providing the authoritative interpretation of the written Torah, there was a legend found in Tractate Avodah Zarah 8a, containing a Talmudic hypothesis that Adam, the first man, established after noticing that the days were getting shorter as a punishment for his sin. A tradition of fasting before the winter solstice and then rejoicing after, which festival devolved into the Roman Saturnalia. The prominent halos depicted in mosaics found in their synagogues, with circular representations of the zodiac or the seasons, very well represented the importance of an attribution to the sun deity before Christianity. Saturnalia was also interpreted by the Neoplatonist philosopher named Porphyry as the freeing of souls into immortality. This festival may have been influenced, or may have even influenced later, some of the customs occurring in Western Europe during midwinter, like Christmas, Niños Inocentes, or the Feast of the Holy Innocents, and Epiphany, or Feast of the Three Kings. How come then do Christians put the date of Jesus' birth on December 25? To be sure, the date December 25 was decided by the cunning Roman scholar named Hippolytus. He just determined for himself that date to be the birth of Jesus early in the 3rd century AD, by assuming that the conception of Jesus took place in the spring equinox, which he also placed on March 25. Adding 9 months to the date of conception that he believed so, he was able to connect the date of birth to the winter festivals, thus taking advantage of and synchronizing it with the celebrations already preceding the supposed date of birth. This is the process of syncretism done by the dominant culture that intends to absorb the servient one. This manipulation by Hippolytus was criticized by scholars as erroneous because the normal gestation cycle of a human live birth is 40 weeks, which would mean Jesus was born in mid-January. Even the disciple Luke in the biblical scriptures made specific reference to shepherds grazing their sheep in the fields at the time of Jesus' birth. This would thus put the date to any of the warmer months of the year not during winter. Working back using the Gospel of that disciple, by using as reference point 30 years before the death of Jesus, which was generally regarded as having taken place in 33 AD, then his birth could not possibly be in 1 BCE, or year 0. The Gospel of the disciple Matthew also put the birth of Jesus around the time of King Herod the Great. Most scholars agree that this was sometime in 4 BCE, which again meant that Jesus was not born in year 0, but rather earlier and possibly as late as 6 BCE. It was not until the 4th century AD that the officials of the early Christian religion decided to refocus the attention of the citizens of Rome away from their winter solstice celebrations and started proclaiming the fake news that Jesus was born on December 25. The early Christian leaders, instead of agonizing or antagonizing the unbelievers, united the traditional festivities and the birth of Jesus to deter those that they branded pagans from celebrating the winter solstice. Let us now look at the calendar systems then prevailing. Referring to the calends, meaning the first day of every month in the Roman calendar, the festival Saturnalia was held quarto decimo calendarum Januariarum, or on the 14th day before the calends of the pre-Julian calendar ending on December 29, which Roman calendar the Romans believed to have been established by the legendary founder of Rome named Romulus and his successor Numa Pompilius. When Julius Caesar had the Roman calendar reformed, because it had fallen out of synchronization with the solar year, 2 days were added to the month of December, and the date of Saturnalia was changed, yet still falling on the 17th, but with this now being the 16th day before the calends. Note that the date December 17 was and still is the first day of the astrological sign Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, the planet named for the sun god. It is proximate to the winter solstice, which falls from December 21 to 23 on the Julian calendar. Scholars, ancient and modern, wrote about the widespread use of cere, or wax candles, to symbolize the returning power of the sun's light after the winter solstice. This was the start of the original ornaments to our present-day Christmas trees. When we look at the Roman calendar used in year 0, Saturnalia was held during the 10th month, called Mensis December in Latin, which consisted of 29 days. The 17th day was referred to as ante diem quartum decimum calendas, or 14 days before the calends. Under the Julian calendar proposed by the then Roman consul Julius Caesar in 46 BCE, and which took effect by edict on January 1, 45 BCE, the dates for Saturnalia remained the same, except that the number of days for December now became 31. The Christian theologian and philosopher named Titus Flavius Clemens, also known as Clement of Alexandria, wrote around 200 AD that there were those who said Jesus' birth was on the 28th year of Augustus and in the 25th of the Egyptian month Pachon, which was on May 20. There were also others who claimed he was born on the 24th or 25th of the Farmuti, which was on either April 20 or 21. If we look at the Bible in Luke 1:26, the Annunciation of Mary was during the time that Elizabeth, mother of John the Baptist, was in her 6th month of pregnancy. This ecclesiastical holiday was created in the 7th century AD during the time that the Julian calendar was already in use and was assigned to be celebrated on March 25, which was the traditional date for the spring equinox. Counting 9 months later, the date of birth would be December 25. By this time, the quartodeciman, although unrelated, had already been forgotten. There was also a traditional Jewish belief that great men were born and died on the same day, as well as lived a whole number of years without fractions. Thus, Jesus, thought to be a great man, was considered to have been conceived and died on March 25, which was calculated to have coincided with 14 Nisan, also known as the Passover. This probably was the basis for the interpolation later by Hippolytus, as found in his commentary on the prophet Daniel, that the date of Jesus' birth was on December 25, as the date of his passion was on March 25. It was, however, only on December 25, 336 AD, in Rome, that the first recorded Christmas celebration, in the manner adapted by the Christians, was held. In October 1582 AD, the Gregorian calendar was introduced by Pope Gregory XIII. He continued to employ the months of the Julian calendar that had Latinate names. December 17 was retained, except that it was no longer on the 10th month, but the 12th, and the number of its days were now 31. What then caused the change in the name of the festival from Saturnalia to Christmas? In 1038 AD, before the Gregorian calendar took effect, the English word Christes Mese was recorded according to the Catholic Encyclopedia, and in 1131 AD, another word, Christes Messe, appeared in the Church's records. On the one hand, the word Christ was from the Greek Christos, or more properly spelled as Christos. It was translated from the Hebrew word for Messiah, meaning anointed. On the other hand, the Messe was derived from the Latin Missa, meaning celebration or Mass. For a time, the word Christian Mass was also in the Church's records, but this was discontinued and now considered archaic. Christians at this point believed more that God came into the world in the form of a man to atone for the sins of humanity, rather than in knowing Jesus' exact birth date. His primary purpose was more important for celebrating Christmas. The customs of various nations with secular themes and origins eventually mixed with the pre-Christian and Christian rites, some of which developed independently of the commemoration of Jesus' birth. By the Middle Ages, Christmas was still like Saturnalia, a time of raucous drinking, gambling, and overeating. In the middle of the 19th century AD, gift-giving was revived in English-speaking countries. Prominent authors like Charles Dickens, of A Christmas Carol fame in 1843 AD, sought to reform the conscience of Christmas by turning the riotous holiday into a family occasion. Saturnalia was not unique to the Romans. There was also an ancient Old English celebration during the winter solstice known as Yule. Yule was an indigenous winter festival celebrated by the Germanic peoples. The earliest references to it were in the form of month names lasting around 2, between what is now mid-November and early January. The Old English derivates Yeol or Yeohol and Yeola or Yeoli for Yule indicate also a 12-day festival that was later called Christmastide. The Aera Yeola referred to the period before the Yule festival, which was held in December, while the Aftera Yeola was the period after Yule or in January. In most forms of the ancient religion known as Wicca, this holiday is celebrated during the winter solstice as the rebirth of the Celtic great horned hunter god, viewed as the newborn winter solstice sun. The methods of gathering for this Sabbath varies by practitioners, some in their homes, others with their covens. The Celts had already pictured their gods in human form even before the Roman conquest of Gaul. Cernunnos or Carnonos, as this god was known to be, could not however be identified into Roman ethnography and was not given any interpretatio Romana or Roman interpretation, perhaps because it was too distinct to be translatable into the Roman pantheon. In conclusion, Christmas was never Christian in origin, although the word Christ was retained, to which the suffix Mass was added. Jesus was also not born on December 25. The reason or justification for celebrating this occasion is not the point here, for what we are concerned with is how Christmas really began. There were already other belief systems around the world that celebrated the winter solstice in honor of their respective sun gods. Clearly, it was just the process of syncretism.
Tapos ang ating serye, bahagi ng serye natin tungkol sa Kapaskuhan. Muli, kung kayo ay bago pa lang sa channel na ito, mag-like na, share, at saka mag-comment din, at saka kung kayo ay bago pa lang, ay mag-subscribe kayo. Okay? Click the bell for notifications and updates. Hanggang sa muli, light, love, and life. Namaste.